This video is on why great mystics have not understood the nature of the ego, or because of that, even the nature of the transformation. The transformation that takes you into what I will call the standard basic Hindu enlightenment. Let's put it like that. All right, so it turns out that this topic actually has very profound implications on the whole journey and its nature. What I'm going to use to explain it is a particular analogy that I found is very useful for it, and that I've given this, I think, briefly in a couple other videos, but I wanted to make a video specifically on this topic, a short one, hopefully, which I always fail to do. So what it is the analogy of the fish. There's an old Chinese saying, and it's probably in Western sayings as well, that a fish don't ask a fish about the water. And of course, I think it's immediately obvious what they're saying is that if you're born in the water and you live your whole life in the water, you will never have necessarily abstracted out what the water is, you see. You will have taken it so much for granted. You may not ever have even considered the fact that there's water. Now, what people are seeing is pointing at so often is what's in the water. And so, fish sees the algae or the seaweed, it sees other fish, it sees the rock and the sand on the bottom floor, but it doesn't it wouldn't necessarily see the water at all, and only what's in it. Now, as it swims through it, it'll feel something, but that doesn't mean it'll necessarily have abstracted out this quality of water. And that's my contention, is that, let me not just say itself at this point, let me say it is the most basic qualitative aspect of egoic consciousness, the consciousness you have when there's an ego. And since it affects the whole of consciousness, it's best to call it egoic consciousness. The entirety of the experience, the entirety of the way the consciousness functions is different because the ego is in there. And it's because of the wholeness of consciousness that any part affects the whole. And actually, it changes the entire experiential dimension of consciousness when there's an ego in it. It's a very specific qualitative dimension. So this is largely not abstracted out and seen, what the qualitative dimension of egoic consciousness is, even though it is suffused throughout the entire experience. In fact, it is the main quality. The main qualities of the experience of consciousness people are not even aware of, because it never varies, because you don't go in and out of it, except in extraordinary experiences. And even then, you don't see what's happened. So now, before I tell you what these qualities are, because I've already had other videos about that, what I want to say is why these great mystics don't understand the ego. Now, everyone's going to be certain they do. They just have certain descriptions, but I'm going to tell you why they're all superficial to the point that they're blatantly wrong about what the ego is, the nature of it, its essence. In fact, they'll say the ego actually doesn't even exist. That's very popular. But I'm going to discuss in this video, because I have other videos that say what the ego is. But in this video, I want to say why these great mystics don't understand the ego. Because what I'm describing the ego as has never been given before. And so the question is, why didn't they see this? And of course, it revolves around the nature of enlightenment. So here we have this fish swimming in water. So anyhow, so what people have jump out of the water, jump out of the egoic state, and when they have extraordinary experiences, and they jump out into the air, and they have something extraordinary to say about it, as extraordinary experience, and they go back in, and they're basically back where they were, because those temporary experiences are very important to let you know that there's more to consciousness, and it gives you a motive, who wouldn't want to live in those beautiful states. Of course, once you get there, it's more extraordinary in a sense, but it becomes absolutely ordinary by the time it's permanent. But anyhow, okay, so now what's happened to these great mystics is they've jumped completely out of the water permanently. They have transformed. And so that they are now, and I said jump, actually they're plucked out. You don't attain enlightenment on your own effort. And so they're plucked out and they're dangling in the air. Now, do they know what that ego was? When they're in the air, the qualitative dimension of consciousness is different. Completely different. There's something completely new in consciousness. And the qualitative feel of it, completely different than the old one. But the old one is like the water. The fish never saw, understood. It never brought out, it never intellectually and perceptually saw what actually the most thorough, complete dimension in which you're living in the egoic state. Now, some of what I describe you'll know, but there is a lot that you don't, that I've never seen people talk about in the transformation. Bits and pieces, but it hasn't been pulled together. So in my videos, I try to pull it together. But let's get back to that fish out of the water. It doesn't know the qualitative experience of the egoic state. It's no longer in that egoic state. It cannot experience it if it wanted to. You see? If you think that's not the case, then you haven't been through a transformation or understood it. These transformations, Bernadette Roberts says they're not reversible. You can have a certain experience and then of course it fades and goes away. But I'm not talking about experiences. I'm talking about transformation of consciousness. People don't even believe there's a transformation, some of them. But there is. So they do not know the qualitative dimension of what the ego was like. They knew it had lots of problems. So what does persist? What is there that they do have, that they to form their understanding of what the ego is? What carries over that jump into the new state? Something superficial, because your fundamental experience is going to transform. Something superficial goes over. And what that superficial thing is all your thoughts. There is an entire collection of thoughts that goes down. These thoughts, and it's a huge collection, and they probably won't even know it's gone. I was surprised by it because I had special circumstances. I caught this ego, and I'll describe that soon. And what goes over are the thoughts. The thoughts that go down are just those that are so concerned about observing yourself, watching yourself, seeing yourself, modifying yourself. That's what the ego's about, you know. But I won't go into that in detail because I have that elsewhere. So, so it's just the thoughts. So when they go to describe the ego, they know the thoughts they used to have. And now they have these new thoughts because they're seeing things. They're seeing they are not consciousness as they were before. This identification. You see, now they're left with describing it, the difference, as a difference in thoughts, because they can't describe the qualitative difference. And the qualitative difference is because there's something far more profound than a change in the thoughts. Change in the thoughts, you can have different feelings, you know, when thoughts, all the various thoughts and all the various things a person goes through, all these different feelings, you know, there's a lot of different feelings and so forth in human life. But I'm not talking, that's the qualitative dimension of experience is not any of those particular feelings. And it's that qualitative dimension that changes, that they can no longer experience. But this qualitative dimension, you see, is deeper than thoughts and feelings. And the transformation is deeper than how they account for it. They account for it as a matter of your identity, what you identify with. Do you identify yourself with your body? I don't know why they're so concerned just with what you identify with. You identify everything in a particular way. That changes. Everything changes. And but that's superficial. In fact, they may not even be saying that. Nisargadatta says, follow the sense of I. Not the intellectual notion of an I. They might say that too. You know, I think Ramana Maharshi does. And not, of course, that's all they can point at are changes in the intellect. Because that's what does go across that jump. So they talk about a change in identification. And so people in the egoic state, they can change their identification easily. And changing your identification can change how you feel and see things and think, you know. But they don't realize that these aren't deep qualitative properties of egoic consciousness. They can become, you know, you can be optimistic or pessimistic. Changing those sort of things, you know, can have a lot of effect. There's a lot of freedom when they say you don't identify with the body, you don't identify with your thoughts and feelings, you're the awareness behind it, you know. Someone came to Nisargadatta and gave that description to him, what's going around in non-duality in America. He said it. I'm sure if you look it up, you could probably say it in a more sophisticated way. People love to say non-duality in the most sophisticated way, you know. Not just that all is one, but there's no separate parts to be one. You know, they can go on like that forever. Very subtle, and they think the more subtle they can say it, with less reference to self, the more they think they have it. And so when this guy came before Nisargadatta and described this non-duality, Nisargadatta's reply was, you are deluded. these guys, they don't hold back sometimes, you know. And so they don't understand what the ego was. They don't know what transformed. Now, you know, it doesn't matter to them what it was. They may not even see that it's significant for you, but it's highly significant once you see what that transformation actually is. Highly significant, because it tells you what you are as a human being, and it tells you how as a human being you're going to be transformed. And why did I see it? I'm talking about greater mystics than me. These mystics have jumped way out of the water, you know, a long time ago, and they're to use this analogy, they're thoroughly dried out. I'm still a little moist, you know. Sometimes you spend decades still trying to breathe out of your gills when you jump out of the water. That's why they say leave the boat behind. One of the reasons. And so anyhow, but this is why I saw it, and these great mystics didn't. And that's because I was deliberately dipped back in the water. Now, when I came out of when I came out of the water, just within a couple days, maybe a day or two, somehow I intuited that the energies were moving differently. Energies of consciousness were moving through the brain differently. And I realized I could press them back in. I could reroute that energy back to the way it used to go. And I kind of succeeded. But because I had pushed it in, it kind of twisted it a little bit. I mean, it just felt bad, the ego. It had because I had pushed it back in. Now, so I think it was like a year or two later, or maybe it wasn't just a matter of a few months. I don't remember. But God dipped me back in. I think he did it deliberately for a couple of reasons. One, to see that the ego was not as bad as people are portraying it as. It's not what they think. All they're thinking about is egotistical and having a wrong concept that there is an individual here and, you know, separate from the world, you know, and so forth, which I go into in other videos. And so when I went back in, I was there for quite a few hours. Not 24 hours, but good enough, well, almost 12 hours. And I saw it in a very positive way. The ego has all this energy. It's got hope. It's got drive. It's got ideals. It's got all these qualities that I won't go into because I do that in other videos. But I was dipped back in, and then I was pulled out again. And when I want to know what the qualitative experience of my life had been like for the 30 years prior to that, I have to remember that 24-hour period. Because the rest, the 30 years of life in that egoic state, of course, I started transforming very young, so I'm talking about reaching the Hindu enlightenment. But anyhow, that 30 years, I have to remember that 24-hour period. because once you go back in, you recognize it. And so I think I was deliberately put back in for the purpose of understanding it. And some parts of it I was taken back and forth till I saw exactly what it was, what the ego actually is. And that's what it takes. That's what it takes. So, if you go through these transformations and you want to understand what it is, ask God if you can go back, take a peek, because you will be surprised at what it was. "20 years later, I was actually put back in again. Just because there was someone I wanted to know what they were experiencing. And, if you really want something, and it's based on compassion, God can show you. So, but then I had already adjusted to the new state, dried off a fair bit, you might say. And you can see the extraordinary difference between the two states.